Hey there, scary story fanatics! Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone, with your host, Sociopathic. Now, I believe the head bone's connected to the neck bone, but I don't seem to have any left. Looks like I've got a spare noggin. What to do with all these spare parts, you ask? Well, forego the blueprints and get comfortable as I put together a fearful fright fest you just can't run away from. Spare parts for the gods.
Summers are notorious for and synonymous with fun. But personally, I'm glad summer's coming to a close. It's good to have a reason to stay indoors and out of those damn woods. One that won't call attention to my sanity anyway. It sucks because I really like the woods and the countryside. I used to love living here. Now, all I want to do is leave the desolation of rural nowhere America for someplace a little more populated. I'm sure that wouldn't help. Might even make circumstances worse. But being around a multitude of others provides at least some extra safety in regard to being targeted for slaughter. I don't even know if that's what it wanted. But I can't imagine the desires of that thing to be anything less than dark, malevolent, and evil. Sure, that thing is far away from here. But I'm also pretty sure it's not an isolated incident either. I happened to stumble into this hellish reality of nightmares that I live in now about a month ago. My older brother and I were on our very first road trip. See, my older brother, Adam, was in a pretty severe car accident about 1.5 years ago. It messed up his knee pretty bad, requiring him to receive physical therapy and being bound to a leg brace for 6 months. He can walk and everything now, but my brother loved to run, and likely still would if not for his handicap. In his adolescence, Adam ran cross-country and track. Like, the guy has a shelf of all his trophies and awards. Now, if he goes for a run, his knee blows up like a blood-filled balloon and subsequently needs to be drained by a physician. Due to these outcomes and a huge period of being unable to work, Adam received a healthy settlement from the insurance company, as the initial accident was not his fault. He deposited and saved most of it, but he did use a portion to pay for a trip for my parents, a month-long vacation to Hawaii and the surrounding sea on a cruise. In their absence, I being 17 at the time, Adam decided it would be cool if him and I were to take a road trip around the United States. This would be a month-long journey that started at the northeast and moved west and then south at the south coast, continuing on in a counterclockwise trajectory until arriving back home at the end. I think we had been on the road for a solid 10 hours a day for 4 days before we hit North Dakota. Now, we had planned on sleeping in campgrounds primarily throughout our journey, so as to minimize costs. Up till this point, however, we had broken down and stayed in the nearest Motel 6 or other similar dive establishment. Honestly, we were looking for another similar place to stay, but we had crossed into the center of the state with only one odd radio station to listen to and nothing around for what was literally miles. Adam and I both agreed to turn off the radio a while back. The reception was shitty any way you cut it, and whatever cadence eked through the obstruction of static revealed the singular frequency to be some kind of talk radio program or something. I remember Adam saying that the next place we came across would be our place to stop for the night, as the sun was threatening to dip below the flat horizon. That meant no matter the conditions, we were committed to whatever we happened upon. And as our luck would have it, the next indication of human life we passed by was a small, billboard-like sign on the right-hand side of the road. The letters, printed over a silhouetted forest backdrop, grew with its increased proximity to the passenger side of the car, spelling out the words that are almost an ironic, twisted pun of the macabre when looking back on it now: Devil's Pond State Park. Adam told me to open our road atlas to the related section and research whether or not we could camp there. Now, I realize that many of you, like me, are quite well used to using apps and GPSs to find your way around, but it never hurts to have a good, solid, tangible pathfinder that can still be used in the absence of technology and/or signal. Another cool thing about the atlas we had picked up at the start of our journey was that each state and national park was not only highlighted in green, but tent symbols were laid out in the areas where it was permissible to camp. Sure enough, Devil's Pond State Park did indeed boast a small black symbol of a tent just within the green border. We had found our place for the night. About 5 minutes down this straight, paved but otherwise cowpath of a road, a much larger sign spilled forth from the horizon, the exact same logo and name printed on it. Adam was speeding a bit, hoping to make it before nightfall due to the extra challenge of finding the place in the dark, but in reality, it could have been as black as the void of space, and we still could have found it without a hitch or issue. It was the only thing around that wasn't grass, sky, or distant trees. I don't even think we had passed a speed limit sign for more than 50 miles. This place was in the middle of nowhere. Our conversation fell silent for a few moments when we turned the corner of the long dirt drive. The grounds were so silent, I could hear the pop and click of each and every stone as it crunched beneath the wheels of the four-door. Immediately after crossing the threshold of the grounds, a large metal box greeted us center path. My brother pulled up to find a payment box for placing fees in accordance with an overnight stay. If it were me driving, I honestly would have paid the $2 lousy, but Adam, realizing it to be some sort of honor system, forewent payment and would just claim forgetfulness if later questioned. As he suspected, we never were. We hadn't seen another vehicle for miles. The camp was nearly empty, and there wasn't any type of management or watchman in sight. Now, as flat as the terrain is here, what isn't occupied by the lake-sized, driftwood-riddled shallow waters of the Devil's Pond itself was thick forest and vegetation as far as the eye could see, and considering the density of it, wasn't really all that far. Adam slowly crept the vehicle down several winding gravel paths before finding a place he deemed sufficiently secluded from any other campers. I didn't really see what the big deal was. There were literally only 2 other vehicles in the entire campground, and at both sites, I saw not a soul. Any spot seemed secluded enough for me, but half of that was due to the desperation building inside of me regarding my desire to get out of the car and stretch my long, restricted legs. There was only one thing I'd been hoping for since we had settled on this place: the possibility of meeting someone my age in this rural expanse to spend some time with, sharing our stories of roadside adventures. But like I said, it was easy to see there wasn't much chance of meeting anyone my age at this place. When the car came to a stop a few feet from a pre-existing formal state-built type fire pit, I opened my door and practically leaped out of the car. 10 hours on the road is just too much, especially daily, my favorite part of each day was getting out of that damn cramped vehicle. I tried to get him to take his SUV, but he said the Corolla would be better on gas and save money by the fistfuls. True, he had a point, but those hypothetical fistfuls of cash came at an expense of their own, a price that if I had related foresight, would have compensated for by chipping in the difference in gas and insuring the larger vehicle. But hindsight and all that, and what was done just had to be endured at this point. Since it was nearly dark when we arrived, Adam promptly broke out a small duffel bag-like container for the tent and instructed me to search the area for firewood. Something that I learned quickly was much more difficult a task than anticipated. Whether it was a park cleanup or the woods had already been plundered for their dead lumber by years of previous campers. But when I walked off into the depths of the forest, I quickly noticed a distinct lack of limbs and branches, both upon the leafy ground and exuding from the respective trunks of trees, for as far as my little flashlight could illuminate. At this point, I noticed the patches of bare earth that formed unevenly across the terrain, and assumed it to be the result of a recent drought or even just normal for this time of year in this part of the country. But as I progressed onward, a slight sinking feeling began to weigh on my chest, like the dim sensation of hopelessness. But I had no explanation as to why. It was just the woods. Dark, sure, but I grew up in forest-covered mountain ranges. So, for the dimly lit woodland to be the source of this dread would have made no logical sense. And yet, no matter how hard I tried to shake the feeling, how I attempted to will myself that nothing was wrong, it stayed with me like a growth on the forefront of my consciousness. Maybe it was the highlights of illumination reflecting off the grass and their respective borders, underscoring the dark patches of worn earth. Maybe the way they were spread through this area and the patterns they created. But nevertheless, a dreadful thought occurred to me and tipped me towards the pit of despair, hanging on loosely by a thread of rationalism and logic. Parts of the spaces were identical, like the reaches of each one exactly matched a part or whole of the others. This semblance of similarity, of repetition on the ground, before had dangled me above that chasm of fear and hopelessness, but the coinciding idea that crossed my mind next dared to shove me over with force. I hadn't realized it before, mostly because each one resembled a cardboard cutout of a root system silhouette from beneath looking up. The majority of the shape was its center, spreading out into oblong circular shapes that had an almost smooth, rounded edge on one side and tentacles of roots, or snakes, at the other, ending quite abruptly before revealing their twisted pattern once more a few inches beyond, and ending once more a few inches beyond that. In a way, their common traits in shape, size, and design made them look like colossal footprints in the softened earth, intermeshed and overlapping atop the leaves and grass of the forest floor, obscuring the shapes into new patterns when crossing and overlaying each other. Of course, my intellect and understanding of reality's actual constructs, along with my interests in the sciences, all combined into a cacophony of a force that pulled me back into a world where monsters and ancient beasts of myth do not exist. And so, I crunched forth through the leaves, scouring all around me for deemably suitable firewood. I was a little shaken, sure, but I was confident it was my imagination getting to me, being such a fan of the dark and morbid. Besides congruency, those shapes held no anthropomorphic shape or trait whatsoever. These thoughts and related ideas washed through my mind until I heard something in the distance, close but slightly muffled by the surrounding trees. It sounded like someone talking, only I couldn't understand what they were saying. I shined the cone of light in the direction that stole my focus, and glared into the void to try and catch a glimpse of anything relevant. Tree trunks, mostly. It took a moment or two of visual examination to identify the odd shape behind a layer or two of thick, woody trunks. Slats of wood, implicating the exterior wall of a cabin or shack or other such structure. And sure enough, after creeping past those few obstructing trees, the object presented itself as a cabin small enough to be a shed. The sounds that had called for my attention, the reason for my encroachment, had not only become louder, signifying that they indeed originated from inside. That loudness also lent a distinguishability that enabled me to discern cadence, syntax, and tone of chanting. And that's exactly what it was. A kind of chanting. But as clear as the phrases had now become, I still understood not a syllable. It sounded as if it came through a speaker, in a dialect that I had never heard before or since then, but I still recognized it. I recognized it because it was the same as that indecipherable, garbled mess on the radio earlier that we had turned off before arriving. What the fuck is going on? Was the only thought coursing through my head, driving me nearly to madness with unanswerable repetition. I attempted to end said madness by finding the entrance to this dilapidated hovel and putting an end to my queries. On the leftward side, I found a planked wooden door of normative width and height. Failure to locate a knob or handle, I simply pushed it open. It creaked with unknown age, revealing a flickering light whose source was a lantern lit in the corner of the room. It was cramped and claustrophobic, containing only a single chair beside a wooden desk-like table about 4 feet in length, boasting the lantern upon its surface. On the table near the lamplight was a box-shaped mechanical apparatus, a microphone, and an assortment of strewn-about loose papers. The wall behind the table was too covered nearly entirely with more sheets of off-white parchments, all tacked and taped to the substrate. Beside them was another door, assumedly and later revealing itself to also lead outside. I inched my way inside, calling out for anyone who may reside within, which was stupid, known even to me then, as there was obviously no one inside, observable from the front door in which I had entered from. Of course, the limitation of stimuli, the monotonous chanting, and the single light guided my curiosity towards the desk and the wall behind it. When I saw the tape player speaking the repetitive words to the microphone, my first thought that went through my head was related to the source of power to this place. There were no electric lights, No power lines, no generators to be heard. And yet these mechanical devices worked. I followed the cords of each behind the table, which proved both too heavy for me to move and too close to the wall for me to check it properly. Wherever the cords led, I still do not know. I next pored over the various papers, all scattered around and fashioned to the wall. Most of it presented script of unknown syllables and odd-looking diagrams that I no easier understood than the language spoken by that tape. Amongst them were pictures, hand-drawn depictions of what looked like to be some hideous being that had never been seen or described by human account that I've ever heard of. And although differing slightly in shape and composition, each depiction was of the same grotesque creature. From what I could tell, it was mostly reptilian, judging from the tail and snake-like appendages. But there were far too many arms and legs drawn on it to make out a clear, definable shape. In fact, I couldn't note or recognize any mouth, face, or even a head. The drawings were either not detailed enough or more morbid than I originally took them for. It was then that the sound of the door swinging open and colliding with the wall with a bang startled me, forcing me to jump in place. My nerves were racked, and every biological alarm was screaming at me to get the fuck out of there. The breeze of air and the silhouetted dark forest beyond told me the door led outside. I rationalized the wind must have taken it. As soon as that thought crossed my mind, as soon as my anxiety level decreased just the slightest bit, a creepily awkward and shrouded figure stepped into the door, slow and calm, contrasting the swollen fear within me that heavily planted me in place. Slowly, the thing turned its head to look right at me, just as I both feared and expected it would. I anticipated it would then lunge at me, but it never moved a muscle. I saw a blackened jaw, framing rows of gleaming sharp teeth that stood out against the ink of shadow beneath its hood, open and close in succession with verbalizing, speaking more of those accursed words that I only understood to be evil. Evil just to utter them. Slowly I began to back up, facing him until reaching the other door behind me, as if backing down from a wild, protective black bear protecting her cubs. My hand had found the frame, the door still open, and since that thing had returned and yet not moved, I turned to run as fast as I could. And run is what I did. I sprinted towards the campsite until the lactic acid caused my muscles to burn and scream at me to stop. I refused to listen, yet I did stop, halted by a ghastly, forever disturbing sight that I will not describe here. Eventually, I did manage to escape from that forest and back to the car. Adam was pissed that I had been gone so long and that I had returned empty-handed. He called me a wimp, a fucktard, and a few other choice names from his sophisticated vocabulary, and refused to leave. He had located some wood on the other side of camp during my long absence and had gotten a small fire started anyway. But I had no interest in camping anymore. He had set up the tent and, once tired, slept inside. I spent the night in the car, doors locked. Morning eventually poured over the horizon, painting the world in an orangish yellow like that from incandescent lighting. We packed and were back on the road without a hitch before breakfast. I never saw that place again, and I rarely spoke of it since, even once finishing the trip and returning home. I will never return to Devil's Pond, North Dakota. There's something in those woods, evil and malevolent. Something that should not exist here in our world, but does so anyway. An abomination against natural law. But alas, this tale is not of Devil's Pond, or rather, does not concern it anymore. Here I will provide you with a description of what it was that had momentarily halted my absconding from the dreaded forest. The beast that nearly overtook me before my hasty escape, or at least, I'll do my very best. The woods were very dark, as I said, and the weak ray of light proved too puny to illuminate the thing in its entirety. But at the sight of a portion of that thing, a piece that bore no semblance to any mental construct within memory, and the unnatural sounds that boomed from its direction, forced me to stop with a skid, almost tumbling to my face. I scanned the thick, long appendage, trying to understand what exactly it was that I was looking at. A tangled mass of fur and flesh, eyes and mouths, broken, twisted, and melded together in one solid form. It was motionless, yet it moved. The object as a whole remained still, but those separate organic pieces all twitched and moved ever so slightly on their own, independently. The light from my flashlight scanned upward, revealing a mass of a thing, fur and flesh arms or legs jutting from every direction, a conglomeration of eyes, animal and human, intertwined and all looking at me, formed and presented near the top of the thing. The distal tips of the limb-like things ended with twisty bones and various forms of outward organic tissue, mostly looking like a compilation of jagged, broken digits and antlers or bones. Then, the terrible thought returned, and this time, nothing would be there to save me from toppling over that cliff face of terror and despair. The ends of those limb things, its feet or paws, or whatever that thing would call them, were an exact match for those colossal footprint-like patches I had noted previously, belonging to the same colossal beast that would be far too big to exist naturally in our own time, which matched perfectly to the horrific eyesore now heaving in place before me. I then noted a sound that, although I just noticed, had been there the whole time. Soft gasping, moaning, and animal-like whimpering emanated from those twisted mouths covering the surface of that thing in grotesque patches. An element noted only briefly before the thing bellowed at me again, with only an unnatural scream, but in a way that I knew for a fact it intended to cause me mortal harm. When it did, I saw a final image that sent my sanity reeling. A mass of corpses, things of people and animals, formed and tied together, inseparable, served as the thing's overall form, made horrifically clear when the bellow was corresponded with the opening of what can only be a great mouth. It was that thing, the thing from those drawings, not reptilian or black, but the same shape en masse. I ran. I turned to scramble through the trees, not back the way I came, but not towards that thing either. I reached the lakeside and noticed no sign of anything following me or crashing through the trees and underbrush behind me. Carefully and quickly, I started off on a new path, resulting in me ending up at camp and later retreating the following day. I tell you this now because I'm pretty sure that thing, that dark shrouded creature in the shack, had called that thing, using that accursed dialect that had played over the radio earlier in the day. Its source, I understand, to be that place in the woods, coming from that tape. I tell you this now because last week, late at night, I was up listening to the radio, flipping through stations trying to find the best current song playing. It was only for a moment, for I heard it as I went past it on the dial. But when I went back, I couldn't find anything. But I could have sworn that only for just a moment, in my fleeting through the frequencies, I had heard that chanting. Those insane words spoken in an even more insane voice. Not finding it again, I mostly shrugged it off as a passing flashback resulting from memory and imagination. Or tried to anyway. Now I'm sure. Because last night, I heard it again. A bellowing noise coming from the distant woods behind my home. And today, when I let my dog out back to run, I noticed large patches of bare earth that replaced the surrounding grass that had only been there a day before, each similar and having mostly twisted edges resembling tree roots and snakes. That thing. The thing from Devil's Pond. I think it was summoned. I've done research, and there's more than I thought regarding the topic of fourth-dimensional beings. Beings of consciousness and intelligences, but unable to exist within our reality, having no physical form to support their construct. I think that thing in the shack, the creature that spoke those awful words directly between its jagged teeth, I believe it summoned it. The thing it called forth only being able to exist in a physical body, one, as I understand it, formed from the pieces and parts of creatures from our plane of existence, undying, still agonizing, used as living spare parts, so as to provide that thing with a body of its own. Honestly, I can't imagine a worse fate for whoever those people are or were. I fear just one thing now, however, above all else, that whatever that thing was is just one of many beasts of atrocity. I doubt the same creature from North Dakota has traveled here. I believe there's even more of them than I know about. I hope I'm wrong, because if I'm not, and soon, they might just overtake us all.
Seems that no matter where you run to, the omniscience of evil will always assure your capture. So enjoy your freedom while it lasts. And provided you survive that long, be sure to come back again next weekend for a story you're all too familiar with. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can stitch you all together in terror again next Saturday.